So, selamat sore everyone in Indonesia. Good, good middle of the day, or happy lunch to those attending from Sweden. There's at least one. Uh, uh, Nice of you all to join us. My name is Gustav Dahlin, Deputy Head of Mission here at the Swedish Embassy in Jakarta, and I will host this our inaugural democracy talk that we arrange from the embassy side. Not so many sort of technical or house rules to go through for those of you attending or listening in. You can find them also in the chat box. And the most important message there, I think, is that if you want to ask questions, and we do encourage you to ask questions, please do so in the Q&A, and we will pick them up towards the end of this discussion. And as I said, this is the first so-called democracy talk that we arrange from the Swedish Embassy side, but we intend to arrange many more. And the reason we want to do this is something that we call the Drive for Democracy, which is a campaign that has been launched and driven by Sweden, the Swedish government, the Swedish Foreign Ministry and Foreign Service for some time. And what the Drive for Democracy is about is that we have a growing concern about the threats and the challenges to democracy today. And so this initiative aims to respond to these threats and these challenges. And it's a way of expanding those issues into everything that the Swedish Foreign Service does. And so the democracy talk or the democracy talks is one of the tools in that toolbox to hold conversations, public conversations around issues that pertain to democracy. Because I think, as we will find throughout the discussion that we're having today, that one of the really core foundations of democracy is to have an exchange of opinions and of ideas, free exchange of opinions and ideas, and to be able to meet one's own and others' opinions in a constructive debate, to establish the facts and move forward in strengthening the public conversation and thus the institutions of democracy. So that is the reason for the format that we have chosen for this democracy talk. And it is, of course, very timely then that the issue of this inaugural democracy talk is press freedom. The conditions for the media and for journalists to conduct their work, to find information to share it with the public, and thus contribute to the public conversation and to the public knowledge about all kinds of different things, and thus strengthening democracy in that regard. So this issue, press freedom, is of course one of the core pillars of democracy, and thus in the drive for democracy. So, and to discuss around this issue of press freedom, I have two guests with me today. First one is Febriana Firdaus. She is an award-winning independent journalist and documentary filmmaker from Indonesia. She was for many years a local investigative reporter for Tempo magazines, then going to freelancing, published in over 25 different publications in the UK, the US, Australia, Middle East, and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, of course. So we are very happy to have her on board today. So thank you, Febriana, for coming on this first democracy talk with us.
Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I hope everyone is good as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And adding to that, we also have a very special guest from Sweden, Erik Halkjaer. He is the president of Reporters Without Borders Sweden. He has extensive experience as a journalist, mainly focused on global development, human rights, and international politics. And he's worked with all over the world for newspapers, magazines, podcasts, for news sites, and not least as an editor as well. And other than being the president for Reporters Without Borders, he is also currently editor-in-chief at the independent magazine Sveriges Natur, which comes from the Swedish Society of Nature Conservation. Thank you very much to you too, Erik, for being with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here at lunchtime in Stockholm, Sweden.
Yes, we are sorry for disturbing in your lunch. We were very happy that you managed to join us.
This is important.
Yes, it is indeed. So good to have the two of you with us for this conversation. And just to start that conversation off a bit and why we've chosen to hold this at this particular time, not least, it is, of course, a good day or a good time today to start the democracy talks, because on the 15th of September was the International Day for Democracy. It also just so happens that right now the film festival Europe on Screen is ongoing here in Indonesia, showcasing various films from Europe, and one of two films from Sweden is the film called 438 Days. It is based on a book of the same title, written by two Swedish journalists who were captured when doing some reporting in Ethiopia, put into jail, put into prison on charges of having entered the country illegally and engaging in terrorism. And so 480 days comes then from the time that they spent from being captured until eventually being released. So this is a movie then that accounts for one example of the very tough conditions that there can be out there if you want to do investigative journalism and being a reporter, not least reporting about sensitive political issues, and doing so also in faraway countries. So this is the reason for us holding this talk today. We are not going to go into the details of the film. That is not the topic. But just to take that as a vantage point, and starting with Erik, I mean, you're well acquainted with the film. I know you're well acquainted with the story and even with the journalists themselves. And you're well acquainted with all the discussions that it gave rise to in Sweden at the time. This is now a couple of years ago. But you take this as a vantage point, how well do you think that this is an illustration on sort of the conditions for working as a journalist today? And what is the global state of press freedom at this point in time?
Yes, thank you. Of course, I'm very familiar with the story. In fact, I think that the event was the event that made me more interested into the press freedom issues. I have been working for a journalist for a few years back then, but I got really engaged in the case with Martin and Johan, who are pictured in the movie, and I know them today as colleagues in this trade of journalism. The story is very illustrative, you might say. It's not, of course, it's a drama version of a elaborated version of the true story of the book, so to say. But I would say that it's very illustrative, and I think Febriana will later on tell you real events from today, which might feel familiar if you see the movie. Have seen the movie. Sweden actually is one of the best countries in the world at press freedom, according to the Report Without Borders World Press Freedom Index. We are at place 3 of 180. At the time of the events in the movie, 2011, 2012, we were at place 12, which is, of course, an effect of the fact that 2 Swedish journalists were jailed, and at the time and still today, another Swedish journalist, Dawit Isaak, he's jailed in Eritrea since 20 years back. But these kind of events with jailed journalists and unfortunately the cases of killed journalists affects press freedom dramatically. I mean, that's the highest price you can pay for as a journalist, and also for press freedom, your life, your family's lives, in behind bars, or in the worst case, dead. But it's worth mentioning that last year we counted to 50 killed journalists, which is a third of the amount of killed journalists in 2012. But we also count 387 jailed journalists in the world. And a few years back, 5-6 years back, there were 320. So we see a scenario where fewer journalists are killed, still too many, but more are jailed or threatened with jail. That I don't have numbers for that, but I think that list is that we count in thousands of journalists who are threatened of jail every day. What the movie also shows very clearly is the issue of terror. They were both charged and jailed for being terrorists or helping terrorists. And Dawit Isaak, who is in jail in Eritrea, he's accused of being a terrorist. The same type of charge. These kind of things, they are new since 20 years back because of the war of terror that the US started. They sort of said either you're with us or you're against us. And in those two groups, as a journalist, you are, even if you don't want to, you are included because of the warring parties, so to say. So this we see also a bigger challenge for journalists, that when you tread on the field and you do your investigative story, you can always, the people in power can always charge you of terrorism because of some invented charge they have found in their laws. I think in Indonesia, you're familiar with these. I mean, you make laws that you can use to silence journalists, which is quite common in many countries. We see them also in Europe, for example, in the EU. So press freedom is getting worse. I would say since the last 8-7 years, Report Without Borders, we have seen a continuous worsening of the situation, a diminishing press freedom in all over the world. And the main challenges are these authoritarian rulers and rules and restrictions used against press freedom and journalists. We also see a democratic problem where we see democracy is diminishing in more countries, and with that press freedom. We also see the economy, lots of competition with the big social media platforms who takes the advertisement, and fewer resources put into journalism in general. And then we have also the technology challenge with the global media platforms, and also fewer people, maybe the costs of printing newspapers and running TV stations and radio stations. So that's a technology issue also. And then they have the trust issue. More and more people show a mistrust against media and journalism, which goes hand in hand with the social media platforms and the authoritarian rulers. Of course, they both use this the media to the mistrust to gain or to discredit journalists. Just to finish this, it's worth mentioning that the Ethiopia showed in this movie is an Ethiopia that no longer exists. The current Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, he got the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years back because of his sort of drive for democracy, and he opened all the jailed journalists. We don't see them in the movie, but there are several Ethiopian journalists in this prison together with Johan and Martin. They were all released a few years later. But today, with the war in Tigray, in the north of Ethiopia, we see once again how press freedom is under pressure in Ethiopia. Sweden is also better at press freedom, as I mentioned in the beginning. And even Indonesia, worth mentioning, has climbed a bit in this global press freedom index. Not much, but worth noting. There are still lots of challenges in Indonesia, which Febriana will talk about, and also in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thanks, Erik, for painting that sort of broader picture of the state of affairs right now. Very, very interesting and good. I mean, not perhaps an encouraging picture on the whole, but good to hear that there are, glimmers of hope out there as well. So if I turn to you, Febriana, listening to what Erik just said, the broader picture here, is this a picture that you recognize, or what do you think are the sort of main challenges that faces journalists today?
Yeah, thank you, Gustav. So I think I'm very familiar with what Erik just explained. Just before after the team contact me to be one of the panelists here, I wrote some of the fresh case of violence against journalists in Indonesia. And in September 16th, a journalist in Aceh was found murdered and his body found in a river. So this is just happening like 4 days ago before our talk right now. So the murder of the journalist, even took after 20 years of reformation, is still happening in Indonesia. And it's scaring me because I'm independent investigative journalist. I'm a freelance who always report very sensitive issue across the country. And every time I heard about the story of the journalist murderer, I'm always thinking that I could be the next. So this is one of the strict example of how the situation of the press freedom press freedom in Indonesia. But also even before that case, there was a journalist who was arrested for just asking a clarifications to the police spokespersons in Mamuju Regency in West Sulawesi, and then another journalist in Papua who was intimidated and his car vandalized by unknown people. So this is still happening in Indonesia until to this day. So there is, I told that after the Reformation in my era, as a journalist, I thought that I'm going to see a better situation, but just 4 days ago, a journalist found murdered in Aceh. So yeah, so this is and if you talk about in the Southeast Asia regions, I think the situation not only in Indonesia but other countries in Southeast Asia, we are experiencing the similar threat. So it's more even complicated with the geopolitical issue in Southeast Asia, because there is two superpower country who wants to influence or to gain more influence in the regions. So like, for example, there is like an American journalist, Danny Franster, who is like the managing editor of the Frontier Myanmar, who is still like being arrested until to this day. So yeah, this is like the real situation right now in Indonesia and other region in Southeast Asia, I think.
Thank you, Febriana, for giving us that sneak peek into the reality of an investigative journalism, and of course, very disheartening news of journalists even being killed. And a good illustration of what Erik was mentioning before on a global scale. But if we, and I think we're going to come back to that later. But if we take a step back, so to speak, from this to look at this issue from a broader, so to speak, societal view, it becomes sort of a blunt question. But for someone who is not, like the two of you, deeply involved in this issue, or is not a journalist her himself, how would you explain the importance of journalism, of freedom, press freedom? I mean, in the very title of this webinar, we have already claimed that this is a pillar of democracy. And thus freedom for journalists and to conduct their work is as well. And so, do you agree with this? And for how would you explain why this is so important, even for those who are not journalists themselves? Fabiana, if you would like to start with that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Gustav. So I think like why like journalism is matter, why like freedom of journalists is the pillar of democracy. I mean, I will answer the question in the context of my country, Indonesia, which is like developing countries. So I think like journalism in developing countries like Indonesia is the only tool to protect the public interest. Like, for example, journalism can monitor where our text being used by the governments. Journalism can provide transparency and balance the power between the government and the civil. In Indonesia, particularly, we cannot rely on the parliament, unfortunately, because from what I wrote when I was in Tempo, some of the corruption case involving the parliament member. So in my case in Indonesia, journalism or media is the only platform that we can rely on to protect the public interest. And the other factor why journalism is matter, press freedom is the pillar of democracy. Because journalism itself upholds the universal values such as human rights, women's rights, children's rights, indigenous people rights, LGBTIQ community rights. So all these vulnerable communities that under threat. I think like journalism can provide like such a protection to this community. And then the most important thing that journalism can also like expose different issue in the one coverage. Like, for example, if we cover story about environments, we also can intersection with the health issue. So this is, we have like such academicians reporting, working on a story of the environment. But with the tool of journalism, we can like hold the accountability of the people who have the power to expose such story, like environmental with health issue, So I think that's why the public should care about press freedom and journalism these days.
Yeah, so holding power accountable essentially is what the reason is. And I mean, in Sweden actually we tend to talk about the media and journalists as the third state power, where you have the institutionalized executive and legislative powers, but then you also need this sort of outside power to investigate into what the quote unquote real powers are doing, and to hold them accountable. And I would perhaps argue also, I don't know if you agree, that other than holding the powers to be accountable, of course, media serves a great role in keeping them informed as well. I can only look to myself as a public servant in the Swedish Foreign Service and government offices. Of course, a big part of the information that I rely on to understand the world and to advise my superiors and so on, I get that from journalism. We don't, however good a foreign service we think we are, we cannot acquire all that information by ourselves. We cannot have it checked by ourselves. So it's, I would argue that it's actually, for this third power or fourth estate, it's not only to hold power accountable, it's actually contributing, hopefully, to those powers being able to do their jobs better and more effectively. I don't know if Febriana, if you would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I think journalists can be a great source if you want to understand the context of what's happening. Like, for example, in Indonesia, even like for the central government in Jakarta, I've been interviewed like informally by some of the like, for example, people like who have like the access to the public policy about what happened, especially like across the country outside Java. So they want my view on, like, for example, how is the condition of the COVID-19 in Aceh? And I just come back from Aceh and I told them, we're not going to find this from the local government, because they are trying to cover the real situation, that the people actually like they don't believe, they have like trust issues with the central government because of the decades of the trauma during the military operation in Aceh, and then this anti-Jakarta sentiment. So this is like the best approach that you have to do, is that you have to approach like the religious leader there. So that's like the kind of like view that I gave them. So as long as I contribute to my country, I think I will be happy to do that. Like as long as I can like help people to get vaccinated. So it's not like I'm being like a free source. Yeah, I'm a free. I mean, being like a source for central governments because I take a side on them. No, but I think like journalists, even though like they are not like expert in one thing, but they travel a lot and they can be like a great source. Like not only Aceh, like for example in Kalimantan or Sulawesi or West Papua, like they always ask me, what is the best approach? Oh yeah, you don't, like for example ask the military to involve in the vaccination programs in Papua, because people like are going to avoid that because they have like this trauma with the violence. So I just give my view, and then I think that it's a great conversation if they want to listen to journalists.
Great, thanks. And I want to sort of spin on that and turn to Erik again. But just before that, I'd also like to remind our friends and audience listening in to please contribute to the conversation, if you will, by posting your questions in the Q&A, and we'll bring them up as we go along. Turning to Erik again, you've been listening now for some time on the views of Febriana. Happy to hear your comments on that, and also given what Febriana has just described about the importance of press freedom. I mean, part one, do you agree with that? And also, if it is indeed that important, what are the most important elements that need to be there for press freedom to exist, and what are the things perhaps that countries and governments should do to create conditions for good journalism that is actually in their best interest as well?
Yes, thank you. I think Febriana very clearly described the importance of press freedom and independent journalism in an open, free, democratic society. And she mentioned several keywords like accountability, transparency, scrutinize, and I would underscore just the right to information that you mentioned, Gustav, that the people have the right as well. Freedom of expression is one right, but another right is actually the right to information, to have the information so you yourself can make up your opinions and take fact-based decisions of your life, which the most important decision is free elections, to vote. And in order to vote for different candidates in an open democracy, you need to have information from different sources of media outlets. So it's also important to have a wide selection of media outlets and also owners of the media. If you're not familiar with how journalism works and press freedom, you can try and think of a society where you don't have journalism. You only have the government propaganda, the private sector commercial message, maybe disinformation from a foreign power or foreign group or external group actor. And you can hear it when I say this yourself, that all these messages have there's a thought behind them. There's someone who wants to make you to take a decision that what do you call it? A decision for them, for the people behind the message, to support them. While journalism, in its purest form, it's an independent, fact-based, criticized source of information, where you yourself can make up your opinion. So this is very important. There's an election now in Russia. There's been a war against journalism in Russia for years. And it's very hard to call the elections in Russia free just because the fact there's not really press freedom. Afghanistan, the Taliban have taken power. It's worth thinking here that Afghanistan, the press freedom in Afghanistan was almost as good as in Indonesia just 2 months ago. It's hard to think. You think Afghanistan, a conflict, journalists are killed, it's dangerous. But the constitution of Afghanistan very clearly protects press freedom. And there was a wide selection of media outlets, 12,000 journalists, radio channels, TV channels, private owners, state-owned. There was a very open society for journalism, but it was also very dangerous to be a journalist. Today with the Taliban, this is almost erased, and there is nothing we can call democracy. So as you say in this, it even says here in the title, press freedom, a pillar of every democracy. Sorry, it's my coffee machine turning off. But to sum up here, you can say that politics and politicians are the key to good press freedom. You take Donald Trump or Rodrigo Duterte in Philippines. There are probably some good candidates in Indonesia too, who constantly, every day, attacks media, threats media, maybe points them out and says their names and who they work for, and call them like they're on leech of someone else, and they're used by other powers. And this doesn't help press freedom, and it actually doesn't help themselves in the long run, because they were probably all elected thanks to press freedom and right to information. If you look at a society where there is a healthy press freedom, I don't have to use the example of Sweden. I can take Jamaica, Costa Rica, Portugal, to name a few countries, South Korea, to be closer to Indonesia. You have a society where politicians can be scrutinized, criticized, maybe they have to leave their posts because of journalism. But they will not jail that journalist. They will not erase that media outlet from the face of the earth, or make it harder for them to work. They just accept it and they go on because it's part of democracy. And it's, as Febriana says, someone needs to scrutinize and investigate the politics. But in this same breath, we need to think about the media also, responsibility of the media, the journalists, to also do classic journalism, fact-based, different sources, being criticizing the sources, so that their journalism cannot be accused of being something else, propaganda, disinformation, because then you saw mistrust in journalism. So the media also needs to take the responsibility. And us as consumers needs also to take responsibility to understand the importance of journalism and not go to Facebook and spread all these things that you find on Facebook without even knowing where it comes. Who is the source, from where does it come? We need to be what do you say? We need to be clever customers of media, or more involved in the journalism. And then they have the media platforms, not to forget, Facebook, Google, Twitter, all of them. They need to be more transparent and also support press freedom in much more extent to what they do today.
Thanks, Erik. So political commitment really to press freedom is one of the core foundations here. And I guess just since you avoided to use the example of Sweden, I take the liberty of doing so anyway. I guess that political commitment not also only has to manifest in sort of public support of media, but also building institutions, right, to make sure that press freedom is also guarded from sort of the whims or changing preferences of the media. And just to take then Sweden as an example, where we have institutions, enshrined in our constitution or constitutional laws, which guarantee the freedom of the media, not least, as you say, the freedom of access to information. I'm going back, shouldn't talk so much about myself, but going back to myself as a public servant, I am obliged to document what I do, the work that I conduct as a public servant, information I acquire, information that I send away from my government agency, being the embassy. I have to document that, and this is information that is, there might be some classified material and so on, but this material is supposed to be available for you as a journalist, or actually for any public citizen who wants to come and have a look at what we're doing. And I am also within the right as a public servant to give information to the media, and as long, again, as this is not very top classified information, not to be punished for that, for my superiors not to investigate if I'm the one who has given that information away, and if you, Erik, as if you are the journalist who have acquired this information from me, you are not allowed to inform that I have done so. So I think, just as an illustration on how such political commitment can actually materialize and then be institutionalized. So thank you very much. I see we have some questions and answers coming in as well. I think we'll save them for later now, because I want to move on to this. I mean, you've been touching on the subject earlier in the conversation, how things have changed, not least in the digital area. So, I mean, other than sort of the repression from regimes and the insufficiency of institutions. Yes, now we live in a completely information-wise new digital era, and I mean, creating all kinds of issues with digitalization or digital threats, disinformation. You've been talking about it before. You know, fake news has become a concept, and sort of even though information then supposedly is freer with internet and everyone being able to be a journalist, you also have the sort of potential, at least, monopolization of information by these big platforms. So if I start with Febriana, how does that change things? Maybe both for good and for worse, being a journalist in the digital era. I think you're still muted, Febriana.
Okay, I apologize. I think like this is my favorite topic because I have a lot to say. I'm very active in social media, especially on Twitter. I have a reason why I have to be active there, because I want to claim like the narrative based on my reporting. So I think like we are living, since like the digital thing is rising around the globe, we are actually have benefits but also challenges. So and since then we are living in the post-truth era. So everything that we post, it's not matter anymore whether it is true or not, but it is more on the closeness of the issue with us. So, like for example, if you are like a leftist or a far right, you are more like trust on the news that you believe, that you trust on. So it's not based on the truth. So this is like the challenge for the journalists. I think like the benefit is that the journalists can use social media and internet to like claim their narrative, to spread the news. But also there is a challenge. In the context of Indonesia, what we are experiencing right now, we are facing like face to face with the pro-government social media buzzer. If you have never heard about that, so fake news and the narrative in social media, or the trending in social media in Indonesia, is happened by design by this social media buzzer. So they are not only trying to counter my reporting with all the fellow journalists and trying to like telling that the government is doing great and then they're doing a great job, but also they are trying to threaten journalists by dog some personal informations, like it's happened to me as well. So the social media buzzer is a new phenomenon in this new digital era in Indonesia, and this is like a serious threat for journalists. Some of them even like report, not yet the journalists. I don't think there is a case, but report like ordinary people like civilians to the police for defamation. So this is very concerning. This group of social media buzzer, they have like a power to criminalize not only the civilian but also the journalists, and they are untouchable by the law. So I don't know who designed this behind all of this social media buzzer, and also they attack not only journalists but human rights activists by label them social media warrior, which is like it's the pejorative of the human rights defender. So this is very concerning for me. This movement from the pro-government social media buzzer, and every time we publish story, and even they create their own YouTube channel to compete with the official newsroom in Indonesia. So they even create their own newsroom, and even they have their own website. So this is our challenges right now. And I don't know where they get all this funding came from. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the citizen of journalism and local newsroom is growing, but it's very slow because they don't have funding that they need. So there is like a very contrast conditions. We benefit from this, the rise of digitalism, but also there is like a great challenge in front of us.
Thanks. And just to come back or stay on these social media buzzers, as you call them, even if we don't know really who they are or where they come from, how in an Indonesian or in a global context, whatever you will, how effective do you think they are? They spread disinformation, and if they slander journalists and so on, do you think that in general people believe them, or that people can see through that what they actually do?
It's very effective. I don't have to give like a very difficult example just in my family itself. Like for example, my mother, she support one of these social media buzzer because, since the 2014 presidential elections, remember it's between Prabowo and Jokowi. Indonesia have been divided into these two groups. And it's because of the social media buzzer. So people already are very fanatic to these figures. Jokowi the nationalist and Prabowo the patriotic Islamist. So they already have like very, very fanatic followers. And then this social media buzzer just make it the situation even getting worse by like feed them with the news, like for example, telling that Prabowo, like for example, committed the human rights violations, and then Jokowi, it's not Islam enough. So they both use like the same weapon, like for example, telling like the personal story that actually it's a fake news. Like if we talk about human rights violation, it's different, but it's commenting on some religion. Like remember when during the US election that Obama accused as being converted to the Islam. So this is what happening in Indonesia as well. So that social media buzzer have also like so many followers and so many fanatic followers across Indonesia. And it's very concerning right now. Even like they ask their followers to attack one of the leading investigative magazine in Indonesia, Tempo, my former office, because Tempo criticized the ruling party on some case. They publish like some case on the related to the ruling party and the president. So it's really a big deal, the social media buzzer here.
Yeah, I mean, Erik, if we, on a sort of global scale or in your perspective, is it something that you recognize as well? And maybe just to add to the conversation here, I see we have two questions in the chat box that sort of pertain to this. If I try to summarize them up, it's with of course the plurality of media and information sources of internet. I mean, traditional media and then these buzzers and everything in between. It becomes difficult to know what is true. You can always find another side of the story. You can find a counter argument somewhere. And I mean, Febriana now illustrates how this can become problematic. So one, is this a picture that you recognize? And two, what is it that is needed to resolve this problem? Some kind of schooling in media literacy, or what is it that we need?
Yes, absolutely. We Reporter Without Borders in Sweden, we actually go to school. We visit schools in Sweden every year and talk about press freedom. And one of the issues that we talk about is media literacy. What is journalism? What's the difference between journalism and what someone writes on Twitter or Facebook? And one thing that we usually say, I borrow this from a Swedish journalist, quite famous investigative Swedish journalist. You have your phone is everyone's little printer. With this phone in my pocket, I become the publisher, the responsible one. So what I share on social media is my responsibility. So I need to think about what it is that I'm spreading before I push the send button or publish button. And that's what I talked about earlier, that as a media consumer need to be more, you can't be that lazy, laid back. You need to actually be more responsible. Think about who's the source, who's behind this, what's the message, what can anyone gain from this? This is really, really important in all over the world because there's so much that's not. I mean, it's propaganda, it's disinformation, it's fake news. I don't like the term, but it actually is things that people just invent, etc., etc. So you need to be very careful, and the social media platforms need to take more responsibility. They need to be more transparent. How do they choose the algorithms that make me see what I see in my telephone or my computer? We don't know that. And we see it right now, this week or last week. There's been leakage of documentation from Facebook saying exactly this, that the employees themselves say that they have miscalculated the algorithms instead of having a more equal presentation of information. It's been easier to spread hatred or disinformation that they thought it would be. They have problems at these platforms, so they need to be more transparent. And also when they decide to cancel the account of Donald Trump, with one hand, they're not some Taliban in Afghanistan on the other hand. Who took that decision, and why didn't they take? I mean, what's in Sweden when someone writes something bad in the newspaper? I can go to a special ombudsman, and then they can decide whether this was right or wrong. But who does that at Facebook? We have no idea. It's no open way to know who takes the decisions. So there must be more transparency among the platforms. That's very important. And just to finish off here also, we shouldn't never underestimate the regimes in power. There are so many countries. Reporters Without Borders make a list every year about the press freedom predators on internet. And on that list, we find the governments of, for example, in India, Philippines, Vietnam, several countries, Myanmar, several countries in the Asia, around Indonesia. They are actually putting resources into funding armies of trolls. The only thing that they do on internet is to just hate journalists or spread hate, which leads to violence, or they try to silence journalists or criticists or dissidents or opposition politics, human rights activists. We should never underestimate this, that what might look like a group of angry followers on Twitter, behind them there might be something else.
Yeah, thanks. So it seems, even though everyone thought when internet came, information would be more accessible and everything would be easier, maybe it's just become actually more difficult because you have to discern.
There's a lack, I would say there's a lack of democracy on it. I mean, all the pillars that we wrote for democracy on a paper, they don't work on internet. And we need to become better. I'm not against, I'm all for it. I find it wonderful that I can follow Febriana on Twitter and see all her journalism and her work. It's great. And we can support each other, and we find so much information, and you can make a revolution with social media. But we need to define democracy on the internet.
So we need to establish new institutions that can actually govern and safeguard
Yes.
the flow of information on internet as well. I have a question in the Q&A box that relates a bit to this topic, where I mean, we were talking about or one of the challenges of digitalization being, as you were saying, Erik, everyone is a publisher. Everyone can be their own media outlets, but with that ease of providing information, the ease of acquiring information, of course, people get used to being able to, everything should be just a Googling away, and this puts, of course, financial pressure on sort of more traditional media outlets that need to spend money on journalists like Febriana to do some investigative work and check your facts and so on and so forth. And we have a question in the chat box. It says the person who asked the question says she or he has noted that the government of some Nordic countries provides subsidies to the media, and media can survive increasingly sophisticated digital era. So she is asking if Sweden is one of those countries that provide such subsidies. Maybe, Erik, you can spend just a few minutes on explaining how that system works.
Yes, absolutely. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. I think there are some other few countries in Europe who does this, or maybe in other parts of the world too. And it's, as I said, how the state, the Swedish state or the Nordic states defines democracy, and part of that democracy is press freedom and journalism. And therefore, it's possible for publishers, owners of media, newspapers, radio, TV, to apply for subsidies from the state to run their media outlet. Important here, though, very, very important, is that there's no in this money, there's nothing included that you owe something to the state. It's actually a gift, and you can spend all that money criticizing the government if you want to. as long as you do it through journalism, fact-based, source criticized, fact-based journalism. And this became very clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the things that we said at Reporters Without Borders was that during this pandemic, it's really, really important with the information from a wide array of sources, journalistic sources. So it's important to help the journalists. So in Sweden, the government actually put more money into media to help journalism during the pandemic, for people to get more information. So for us, as long as it's done in this way and not funding just another propaganda channel from the government, we recommend it to everyone.
Mm. And it goes back to, again, I guess, this recognition of just the importance of journalism in itself, that you need to set some funds aside to be able for this business to conduct, and not put conditions on that money that some of that reporting is wanted or unwanted. Along those lines, Febriana, coming back to you, I mean, as an investigative independent journalist, you need on the writing that you do, you need to do extensive field work, of course, and spend a lot of time writing, gathering your material, writing your articles. How difficult is it to find funding for that kind of work, and has that problem grown over the years?
In the beginning of my freelancing, so I will talk like before working as a freelancer, I was a full-time journalist in one of the biggest and the best media in Indonesia. I only got chance to get extensive funding to report in the remote of West Papua once only, because most of the media, like independent media in Indonesia, they don't have such funding. So, but then I become a freelance since 2016, and I start my freelancing, and I was struggling to find funding. I remember I applied to like biggest funding for journalism in the world, which is based in the USA, and they didn't recognize me because I'm just a local journalist. So this is happened almost to all my fellow journalists. So I was one of the pioneer who starting my career as independent journalist, because I don't feel satisfied with I cannot go anywhere but Jakarta, but I want to report across Indonesia and working with the other journalists also across the region. So I feel like I have no hope if I rely on the local media or the place where I work at that time. But also in dilemma, it's hard to find the funding for me. I cannot. There is no local funding for journalism. There is one Alliance for Independent Journalists. They have funding, but it's also very limited. If we want to go to the remote Indonesia, my latest project was in Aceh in Jakarta, and it's with one of the international broadcasting. I spent almost $40,000 US for all that project with cameraman and everything. So it's a great reporting, and it's a hard to read. We work on a documentary film about terrorism. So I want to have that access to funding so I can expose the story, interview with a very difficult source, and then expose very difficult case across the country, so we can publish such transparency, because Indonesian media are not going to be able to pay that kind of money. So I mean, at least like if we want to report outside in Indonesia, we need like at least like, for example, if we don't make a documentary film, because documentary film is very expensive, so we need like at least $2,000, but it's like a huge amount of money. So I think like thanks to the Black Lives Matter, and then there is like a reformation of the international funding across the world, around the globe. Before, I think they were so racist. I have to say this because they didn't recognize the local journalists. They only give the funding to their own citizen who just came to Indonesia, which is parachute journalists, we can call that. And then they don't even have networking. And I was just like, what's the point you give the money to like foreign journalists who just came to my country and didn't have networking just because they graduate from Oxford or Harvard, for example? I didn't get it, but that journalist get it. So I think it's very racist. But after this Black Lives movement in the USA, and then everyone encouraged diversity in the newsroom, so they start to give funding, and then they offered me the funding, and I say I already got from Journalism Fund AU in Europe. That's the only funding that recognized the local journalists in Indonesia. I said, and I'm very proud to get funding from them. And I investigate the malnutrition as the impact of the expansion of palm oil in West Papua, and that reporting got so many awards. So I think like I'm very thankful to Journalism Fund AU who helped me to like. So I want like, if we want to like I mean, like hoping there is like journalists in Indonesia can be independent. First, we have to think about the funding. Secondly, we have to encourage the media to be funding by the public. So it should be like non-profit and it should be funded by the public. So that's my dream, that Indonesian media is not commercials anymore, but it should be funding by the public and it should be non-profit, so it could be independent.
All right, thanks. And ending there on a slightly happier note, at least, that we can send hopefully a positive trend. And I think you might have to correct me on this, but if I've understood it correctly, over the last years, there has been a development where it seems that like more and more people are starting to appreciate the fact what good journalism costs, and that they are willing to pay. Of course, Febriana, this is through private subscriptions, but even, you know, paying a decent amount of money to get a subscription where they know they get quality journalism from, and they're thereby supporting and appreciating that work. I think I know Erik will have to leave us in 7 minutes. So I think after having gone through, I think establishing at least the importance of journalism, of press freedom, of why it is important, but what purpose it serves for society and for democracy, and also going through then a number of difficulties and challenges in this time, and painting in that regard rather grim picture. But if we look then a bit to the future, we have some questions about that in the chat box as well. Sinan is asking about the future of online freedom of speech, mainly in regards to the ITE law. So that's probably most for Febriana. And then someone mentions the uncensored library in Minecraft, which now I feel very old, but I don't know what that is. But if you would look into the future and starting with Erik then, and because you will have to leave us now in 6 minutes, what possibilities do you see? Are there only challenges ahead, or are we becoming more media literate? Are we understanding the value press freedom and the resources and the institutions needed for it, or what do you see in the future, and are you hopeful or are you in despair?
No, I'm hopeful, and I think it's good that Febriana mentions Black Lives Matter. It's just one event that we see all over the world, but we see several of these developments that shows that people for a long time have taken press freedom and journalism for granted, but have started to realize it's not. It's something that we have to fight for. And I think that's making people more aware, which makes me hopeful. And I think it's also become more discussed in the UN, European Union. I mean, as Febriana mentions, suddenly she can get maybe money from the European Union, but not before. It's also something that happens in the European Union. I mean, that you realize that we need to support press freedom and journalists, not only in our own countries, but also in other countries, because we see how democracy is diminishing. And I would advise Febriana to go to the Swedish embassy too and ask. I think. I see that I have to leave now, so I will be very quick. My recipe is the multilateralism. We have to act more together with other countries, not as one actor. We need to work in multilateral institutions to strengthen press freedom and journalism, and also. The uncensored library. It's a library constructed in Minecraft by the German section of Reporters Without Borders to publish journalistic work that can't be read in their home countries. But Minecraft you can see all over the world, and you can download it or you can access it. So the only way in even people in Russia who can't read it in the newspaper or see it on the news can go to this library in Minecraft and read it. And the question is how you can make this more accessible. And I would say it's up to the users, unfortunately. It's still, the whole idea is it to be on Minecraft, because that's where it's safe. The moment we take it out from Minecraft, it's not safe. Of course, you can save it in the server somewhere, but that server will be exposed. In Sweden, it's actually now being downloaded to a library in Malmö, in the south of Sweden. But my advice to the person behind the question is to spread it as much as you can. Use it and spread it. And if you have Indonesian journalists who are censored, who can't get their work published because of different reasons, you could approach Reporters Without Borders and see if maybe you can get it published there. Now I'm getting messages from my other meeting here, so I need to run. I'm very sorry, and it was a great pleasure to have you here, to be here, and I hope to see you soon again.
Yes, thank you very much, Erik. Terima kasih, as we say.
Thank you, Erik.
The next meeting.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, so sorry. Thank you.
No, not at all. A lot of people are interested in your time. Okay, so Febriana, I thought I'd keep you for a few more minutes just to let you reflect also on what Erik was talking about, the future for journalism, for press freedom, for access to information. What do you see? Are you hopeful still?
I'm still very hopeful because I'm still here and I'm still working as an independent journalist. It's my 5th year, and I think that even though the situations for like the threats, the challenge that have to be faced by journalists is still the same. As you know, like in the opening of the discussion, I mentioned about a journalist murder in Aceh, and then our journalists still in the jail. I think like in the future, I think we need the assurance from the government first. In Indonesia, we have like electronic information and transaction law that threatens the journalists, that put journalists in a very vulnerable positions to be criminalized. Now is being talked in the parliament to be revised. We are hoping that the government will, and the parliament and politicians especially, will have a political will to withdraw that part of the law that criminalizes the journalists. I think that the first is, of course, the assurance from the government first. The second, I think, I see like if like the media can be funded by the public, not by the sponsor or like a commercial, I think it will be good. I think this will be like a very long process for Indonesia because we have our competitor with social media buzzer, which is like it costs like the journalist, the public, like I mean the social media buzzer can pinch and defames the trust media in Indonesia. I'm worried and concerned about that. But I think we are going to have like a very long process if we want to be funded by the public. The other thing that I'm thinking is the biggest social media platform in the world, or like for example Facebook and Twitter, they should have like a strict and firm rule to protect journalists. I only got this offer from Twitter, so that's why I feel like more comfortable on Twitter than the other social media, because they assure me that if my account being hijacked, they are going to restore the account. So this is like an insurance that I want, because we never know that my account will be hijacked. And then the last thing, I think like I can see like the future of journalists, in the future of freedom of press journalists in Indonesia can be better if we have against in the funding for the independent institutions that have no requirements for local journalists in Indonesia to report or any issue, like any sensitive issue, to expose, like for example, environmental disaster or human rights issue across the country. So that's what I'm thinking or imagining about the future of journalism in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a glimmer of hope there, at least, or I choose to. But I understand that this is, I think it's a long and it's an ongoing process for the whole world, right? To safeguard this pillar of democracy, as I think we've established that it is, and to understand that we can never take it for granted, right? That we need to keep on safeguarding it, and as I think Erik was alluding to earlier, it takes an effort from all of us, right? To both appreciate this institution, the importance of it, and to be able to discern what is what in all this flow of information. And I think the conversation that we had here today has been probably a very small part, but still a part and an effort to contribute to that discussion and discerning. And I think we've brought up some important aspects of why press freedom is so important for democracy, how it is being challenged in this day and time, the possibilities, but also the difficulties with with digitalization and the proliferation of different media outlets and everyone being an outlet or a journalist, so to speak. And also, not least, as you have been talking about a lot, Febriana, the financial conditions of actually conducting journalistic work. I have come to the end of my list of questions. I think we've managed to cover those questions that have come through the chat box and in the Q&A as well. So I think that we have actually come to the end of this webinar well in time, not making people too tired, and also giving you some time off for the rest of the evening. So just a big thanks to Erik, even though he has left already. Big thanks to Febriana for taking your time, sharing your thoughts and experiences. Keep up the good work. And lots of thanks also for those of you listening in. I hope in the spirit of democracy that you continue the discussion and discussions elsewhere. As I said, we hope to return with more of these democracy talks. I think we'll have our next episode in 1 or 2 months' time. So keep an eye on our Instagram. That's where you'll find the news about new democracy talks. If you're not already following us on Instagram, so please do, so you don't miss this. I'll close this webinar for today, and thank you so much, everyone, for participating.
Thank you for having me. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Bye, everyone.